Good afternoon, Lali Mohammed here from Deviant Productions, where we join you at the 21st Annual InsideOut Film Festival, and we have a really amazing person with us here today. I'm Dr. Samar Habib, leading scholar on female homosexuality in Arab culture. Thank you for joining us today. What did your talk focus on today?
Today I talked about queer Arab cinema, and specifically the Egyptian film industry and representations of queer people in Egyptian film.
What's the current representation?
It's not as prolific as you say, other cinema industries, but certainly it's becoming a critical mass, and certainly we've had representations beginning in the 1930s through the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, noughties. So as you can see, there's definitely a critical mass, and there's never really been a complete and utter absence. So that's really encouraging.
What's been the sort of change from the 30s to the 40s to the 50s to the 60s in the representation of, in particular, lesbian women? Because you talked a lot today about lesbian women in film.
Well, I think the Egyptian cinema industry was, like Hollywood itself, it was affected by the implementation of censorship laws. Hollywood's censorship laws began in the 1930s and weren't abolished until the 60s. By contrast, the Egyptian cinema was, the censorship laws came in 1976. So naturally, representations have kind of really gone through a bit of a cycle. Before the censorship laws, people were able to represent gender and sexual diversity in more bold ways. And it has taken a long time since 1976 to get back up to more daring representations that we see beginning in 2006 with the Yakubian building and Hina Maysara, and the very recent film in 2009 that was really riotous. It created a big fuss and kerfuffle, especially with the censorship board. It was called Uncensored, funnily enough, and they had to go back 4 or 5 times arguing with the censorship board to try to allow the film to be released.
What has this visibility done for Egyptian lesbians?
I find that question difficult to answer, but let me have a shot at it. I think that these mainstream films, these mainstream films are not made by they are seldom made by queer people themselves. So what we have then are not self-representations. We have representations of queerness by non-queer people, and they're always necessarily lacking in something or inadequate. So I don't think that they've necessarily done anything primarily positive. But the good thing is that they raise the issue. They have people thinking about it and talking about it and walking out of the movie theater in a huff and being angry and writing letters to the editor and demanding that these films be censored. And that raises the level of discourse about a subject that, the hegemony doesn't want you to have a discourse about.
That's really interesting. My first thought would have been seeing yourself on film or in cinema would have been empowering, but perhaps seeing those stereotypes can be counterproductive.
I think you know how they say in business or in show business, any publicity is good publicity, including bad publicity. In my opinion, that's how it is. I think you're right that it is empowering. So even if the stereotypes are less than desirable, of course I'd like to see a queer representation. I'd like to see a queer filmmaker representing a queer protagonist with no apologies, in your face, this is how it is. With the exception of a few films here and there, like Alexandria Y, which was, released in 1978/79, and Caramel, which is a Lebanese film that came out in 2007. There's not a great deal of it out there. Queer self-representation is currently predominant amongst independent filmmakers who are working in a very small, tight budget, making short films that have very small releasings. But we're getting there.
Moving forward, what would you like to see in Egyptian cinema with regards to lesbian representation?
Yeah, well, let's say queer Arab cinema. Let's hope. When I wrote chapter 6 of my doctoral thesis, which then I worked into a book, I have a line there that says, when will the queer Arab protagonist, resurface on the Egyptian silver screen, and how will these representations take form or take shape? And I say that only time will tell. So I'm still waiting, and then Caramel came out in 2007, and I was sitting there and I was watching Caramel, and I saw this character called Rima, this beautiful character, sympathetically, lovingly portrayed, and there's no mention of the word, Sohaqiya, lesbian, Mithliya, Hilm, nothing like, no, but you can see it. It's in the film. It's unspoken text. It's in the glimpses, it's in the touches, it's in washing hair. It's in the sensuality of washing hair. I mean, it's gorgeous. And when I saw that, I was like, okay, so our first lovingly portrayed lesbian protagonist with a big releasing has arrived. There is no hatred. There is no, she was raised in a broken home. She doesn't have an Oedipal complex or an Electra complex. She's a fully integrated human being. She's as much an Arab as anybody else. In fact, at the wedding, she's the one who does the traditional singing.
What I find really meaningful, I think, sometimes is when I see images of queer Muslims or queer people in the Middle East, is that they live in fear or shame, dealing with issues of family abandonment. And in Lebanese, that wasn't the case. Their parents navigated their children's sexuality in different ways, but one mother had said, God willed it. And so I'm okay with it, right? And I will affirm my daughter's experiences, and I will affirm her life, and I will celebrate it. And so I find that to be really important, right? Because we constantly see videos of or movies or cinema of shame and guilt, and so what do you think these types of films are doing for women in the Middle East?
Lesbianism is an important film, because it shatters that that view, that Orientalizing view that the Middle East is a kind of a monolith of rejection, familial rejection, that is, and abandonment and loss of hope. It shows you women who are very much comfortable in their identities. It shows you the ways they have created communities and countercultures, ways they've learned to identify each other and themselves to each other, ways to meet. And it also shows you familial acceptance, and it shows you, most important of all for me, is the fact that religion need not be a hindrance, that some people can use their religion just as much to accept their children as they use it to reject them and damn them. And so for some people who reject their children, they may not be religious at all. Yeah. So it really just shows you that just how heterogeneous the queer experience in the Arab world is. So we need to more of those films. We need to show those films to other queer people who are struggling with their identities and say, look, your parents might reject you and throw you out of the house, but you know what? They might not. Because that's what I thought. I thought my parents were going to flip. My mum said, your dad will have a heart attack, so I didn't tell him. And then when I did tell him, he certainly did not have a heart attack because of that. He had a heart attack 10 years later because he smoked cigarettes all his life. But, it had nothing to do with me being gay. But, if I'd had those films, it certainly would have helped me feel better.
For those who have been listening in today, Dr. Samar Habib for the past decade has been affirming and documenting the lives of women who, under the threat of occupation, war, misogyny, and racism, live courageous and brave lives. Doctor, thank you so very much, and enjoy the rest of your trip in Toronto.
Thank you.
Take care.